Hey, what's up everyone out there in YouTube land? My name is Mr. Marlowe and this is going to be lesson 10 for the code.org CSP class. And I'm going to go through the entire lesson 10, but I may break it into 2 or 3 videos just because this one is a little long and a little involved. So let me jump right into it right here first and say what we've got here on the screen is lesson 10. We are building an app that's called Color Sleuth. And in the overview here, it says we're following through a conversation between 2 students, Alexis and Michael, and they're talking about designing an app and how they would go about doing that. And it goes through their step-by-step and their thinking process of how they want to do it. Now, as far as the lesson itself goes, we have some new vocabulary, somewhat new. I know we've seen Boolean before, conditionals, if statement, selection. It seems like we've seen most of that already. New code, we're going to get into the set property block as well as the RGB block, which is a color block that lets us designate a color using the RGB code. So then we jump into next in lesson or section 2 of lesson 10, and this is where Alexis and Michael have that conversation where they're discussing how this app is supposed to work. And then it shows you first here, this is their idea. Now, I'll point out that this is always a good idea if you're making any kind of app or whatever, is to sit down first and talk to somebody else and say, okay, what's this going to look like? What do we want this thing to do? And then draw it out on paper so you can kind of get an idea of what you're doing before you get started with the computer piece of it. But they show you this is what they want the app to look like. They go through this dialogue here and they tell you, it kind of tells you their thinking process behind this and what their plan is. So we go to the next one, and it's going to be some text that's going to show us how set property works. So we got this new block of code that we can use here, and it says it's called set property, and it shows us how it works, which basically it lets us change the properties of anything that has an ID. So in this case, we're using buttons, and these buttons have an ID. We can change various things about the buttons, such as the width, text, height, the X and Y values. But the big thing that we're going to be messing with here is the background color. So we're going to be changing the background color because if we look back at that app we're designing, those colors that we pick on the Color Sleuth app, they're all buttons, and they just have colors in them. So we're going to change the background color for every turn that we take. So that just kind of shows you how to do that if you want to. Then we get into the meat of our app here. This is the first one where we're doing something. So in this lesson 10, what happens is the entire lesson is based on this one app. So from start to finish, all of these are going to be linked together in the workspace. So when we go on to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on, all this is going to carry over with us later on. So when we get to the rest of it, all this stuff will be there. So it looks like there's a lot going on here because it looks like we've got 27 different things to do, but it's not really that bad. Because each one of the things we're doing is a step. So the first thing it says is, okay, let's get ready. Let's get this code going. They've given us all of the stuff here that we need as far as like the different elements in the design. All of that's already there, and they've already have some colors set here. They've got our player, our score thing set, all that. The way this is supposed to work is I'm supposed to look at this and I'm supposed to see which one of these looks different, and I click on the different one, and then it goes to player 2. Player 2 does the same thing, and so on and so on. So the very first thing I want to do is I want to figure out how I can change these colors. And what I get when I start out first is a variable block, and what I'm doing here is I'm setting up a variable named color, and I'm setting it to this RGB value, which RGB value, that is one way of showing color, and we're combining red, greens, and blues together and mixing them up in different intensities to get a certain color. So what it says here is I've got a set property on button 1. It made a background color and it turned it into the variable color. and there's the variable color. So presumably we look at this button here. That's if we mouse over, we can see the ID is button 1. That button 1 right now is this color, 230.155.0. So it says what we want to do is use the set property 3 more times to set the color of the 3 buttons so all 4 are orange. Okay. So I guess that's not that's not this color, 230.155.0. That must be orange. So we've chosen an orange color, 230.155.0 for now, but this will change later. So the first thing I want to do, it says I want to do that 3 more times, right? So I'm going to go over here, I'm going to find this set property, and where's it at? You scroll through here, up there it is, set property. Now pay attention here, there's get property and there's set property. I want set property, and I'm going to need 4 total. So there's 2, 3, and 4. And the first one is already set to button 1. If I mouse over here, I can see that's button 2. If I mouse down here, that's button 4, and that's button 3. So they're pretty easy names. I'm going to go down here to ID, and I'm going to pick button 2. I'm going to click button 3, and I'm going to click button 4, and they've got my color in here, 230.155.0. I think actually what's happening, why these are this teal color, is it's probably in the design. It's probably the default. So if I click here and I click on this, you can see, yeah, the background color, and there's a hex color number there. That's what's giving it the color, but I'm going to be changing it to RGB in a second. So I got this background color, so I set the property button 2. I'm going to change all of these from width to background color. And there it is, width to background color, width to background color. And then I'm doing all 4 of them. And then right now it says color is red for these that I just did. And on this one it says color is color, which if I go back to my variable, it says that's 230.155.0. If I click run, what happens is the first one, you can see it changed to that 230.155.0, and the other 3 it still says red. So if I reset, I go back to the beginning of the game, it takes me back to that teal color. I'm going to change all of these to color. And right now you can see it gives you some options, some default colors that you can type in the text, some RGB values that you can put in, or some hex values. We're going to use a variable, so we want to get rid of these quotes. I'm just going to type in color. I'm going to do that to all of them. I want to make sure I get rid of the quotes, because if it's not going to work with the variable. If I put color in quotes, it doesn't work. That's a string, and I don't want a string. I want to put the variable in there. So boom, there we go. Simple. Click run. Yep, they all turn orange just like that. And they all should be the exact same color orange. So that's all I have to do, I think, on this part. Use set property 3 more times, set the color. 3 buttons are all 4 orange. Done it. They've chosen the color. Okay, so I click finish and continue, and now I'm going on to puzzle 5. And now puzzle 5 is also going to be set property, but what it wants me to do is to add 2 lines to the bottom of the code that I have so far. So what I have here, I'm adding 2 more lines that is going to look like this. And this is going to be, I'm going to be making a new variable called diff color, or different color. So if I come over here to variables, and then the one I want to use is the one that says variable x equals blank, because that's what I'm doing here. And I'm declaring a variable, and I'm setting it to a certain parameter. So I've got the X, it says I want to be diff color, so I'm going to type in diff, and I'm using my camel case with the lowercase to start out with and the uppercase C. It says it's going to be equal to this RGB, so I got to find that RGB button, and if I go into UI controls, I think it's there. There it is, it's the very bottom, and I drag that up there, and then right now it says RGB 250 175.20, so that's what I want to set it to, just because that's what they have theirs, I guess. It probably doesn't matter at this point. But 175.20, and then this last one, I'm just going to leave that blank. I'm going to delete that one because we don't need that one. The first 3 are And actually, you can click on that button right there. That little arrow adds that or takes it away. You probably want to take it away. If you don't take it away, it's probably going to get upset that you have a blank in there. But that last one has to do, I think, with like the intensity of the color or something like that. So these first three set the color, and the last one I think is color intensity, if I'm not mistaken. But I could be mistaken. So then the next thing I want to do is set property. So I'm going to go, it says so I've done this. I've made the RGB string with values slightly different from the original color. So those are slightly different. If you look up here, this was 230. I've increased it by 20. This was 255. It looks like I've increased it by 20. And so it's slightly different, or at least it should be. And then what I'm going to do is I am going to set button 3 to use this different color. And if I go here, here's button 3. Right now I have it as color. I'm going to make it say, I want it to say diff color. So I'm going to click on here and I'm going to type diff, and don't forget there's the capital C right there. So capital C, and then I think it would make more sense to me actually if this were up here. So I'm going to move the variable up there. So I've declared my variables first, and then I'm going to be setting them to the colors. So I'm going to go ahead and hit run. And then if I look at this, and your screen may be a little different, but I can see that these three right here, 1, 2, and 4, are a little bit darker than this one. So this is like a lighter color orange, and then these three are a little bit darker. And that's how this color picker game is going to work. So I start out with the 4, and then one of them is going to be a little different, and I need to click on the one that's different, and then it goes on and on and on. And we get points and whatever. So that's basically how it's going to work, and that's how it starts off. So let me make sure that I've done everything that I should do here. It says we're doing two things. So we created the variable to hold the RGB string of a different color, and then we overwrote the background color of one of the buttons after having just set it a few lines over. So we just changed that. We set it a color originally, now we're just changing it to a different color. So this means your code will change the background color, which we did that. So I think we've done everything that we're supposed to do here. So that's pretty easy. We just added a new variable called diff color, and we changed button 3 to represent that color. So now I want to go ahead and click. Oh, it says keep working. It says there should be at least 5 sets to call. Oh, never mind. Okay, 1 for each. So I didn't do everything that they said that I'm supposed to do. So I think actually I'm jumping ahead of myself. They don't want me to do this. They don't want me to separate this yet. I think on my original one I did that, but they want me to have they want this one to still be color. So I want to change that back to color, and then I'm going to go back here and I'm going to get another set property like this, and then I'm going to say button 3. So and I think actually later on we have to do it this way because this is how we get it to change. So I'm going to do this again, and I'm going to change this one to diff color. All right, so now let's hit reset. Let's run it. And it still does the same thing, because what's happening here is it's doing it so fast you can't see, but first it sets it all to orange, and then it sets the 3 to diff color. So now let's try to finish this. Actually I'm going to go back just so you can look at this for a second. What you should have is the variable here. Oops, I messed that up. Don't do that. That should be there. What you should have here is the variable color, the RGB 231.55.0. You should have 4 set properties for button 1, 2, 3, and 4. All of those should be set to the variable color for the background color. We have a new variable called diff color, the RGB, which is a little different than the last one. And then we have set the property for button 3 to that new and different color. So now I click finish, and it lets me go this time because I did it right. And then I'm going on to some more text on lesson 6. And so now they're talking about how we pick a random button. So set property, works great, blah blah blah, and it's talking about picking a random button. Now, one thing that I think will happen as you're doing this is if you don't read this and you click continue and you skip on to the next one, you might be able to figure it out. But sometimes I think I remember the first time I did it, I had to go back a couple times and look at it to see what exactly they want me to do. So So you try to pick a button at random to make a different color. So we've included the code discussed on the previous page below. So they did put the code in there that they talked about, so at least I can see that. So the last lines of my code should look something like this, and then there it is right there. And it says there's really only one new line, which is the random button, because you can see right here I've got the variable different color, which is right there. And if you changed it to text, to show text, you would see it looks exactly like that. And then I've got this set property piece, so that's what I'm going to be adding in there now. I'm going to switch back to blocks just so you can see how I would do that. But so here it says I want to put this new variable in here. So I'm going to get this new variable, and I want to use the declare variable, it looks like, because I say variable random button ID equals. So I'm going to drag that over there, and then I'm going to name it, instead of X, I'm going to call it rand for random, button with a capital B, and then ID with a capital I, using my camel case. So rand button ID is going to be equal to button plus a random number. So the way that would work is we have to use our little math function, I believe, and put it over here. And I'm going to use the string button, which means it's in quotes. So I say button in quotes. And then, oops, not button, but button. So I have button right there, and then a random number between 1 and 4. So we've used the random number one before. If we take this random number block right here, and then it's between 1, and this default is 10, but we're going to change that to 4. So we have random button ID, and then what we're going to do is set the property of, it says set property random button ID. So whatever this variable ends up being. So you should be able to find it in here somewhere. It's in alphabetical, and it's not showing up. So let's do this. We're setting the property. We're going with rand button ID. We're changing the background color. We're changing it to diff color. Okay, so this was the one we had before. So now what should happen at this point is we have a color, that teal color that it starts, or no, sorry, the orange color that it starts off with. It sets all buttons to the orange color. Then it makes a variable called diff color. Then it picks a random button, and it makes this new variable called random button ID, which is going to be button plus a number. So we've concatenated this string with this. It's going to turn rand button ID into either button 1, button 2, button 3, or button 4, and now it's going to set the property of that to this or this background color to this new diff thing here. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. So now it did it again, but now if you look up here, button 2 is the different color. So I'm going to reset. I'm going to hit run again, and now it looks like button 1 is the random color. So what it's doing is every time I click it, it's making a new one of these. It's picking a random color, and it's making it a different color. So that's all there is to this one. Now one thing it says here is to add a console log somewhere after you generate the button ID. So after we do this, so we can see which button is supposed to be the different color, because sometimes it might be hard for you to see. And the way we would do that is we go into our console log, which where's console log? I think it's UI controls, maybe. It's not that. It's not that. It's not. Oh, it's a variable. Okay, so I go in here to variable, and then what I can do here, just to make it easier for me to see this later, I'm going to put in a plus sign, and I'm going to do a string that says that the random button is space and then quotes, and then over here I'm going to put that variable rand button ID. So theoretically, when I hit reset and I run this, I get a thing that pops up here down in the console. It says the random button is button 1. And if I look at this, I can see, yeah, 1 has a slightly different color. And now if I reset it, let me run it again, It looks like this button, yeah, button 4. It said the random button is button 4. So this is, using this console log is a good way to help me figure out what's actually happening. If you couldn't see the difference between these or something like that, then we could look down here and make sure that it's working. So it appears that it is working. I'm going to go ahead and leave that console log in there because I might need it later. I don't know. So where we're at now is we're at about 20 minutes, and I am done with the first 7. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and stop here, and what we'll do is on the next one we'll pick up with 8 on how to pick a random color. So come back and watch the second installment of this. This is part 1. Come back and watch part 2 and learn how to make a random color.